So there we go, we're being recorded. So what will we cover then? So as always, if you're familiar with this setup, we'll talk about who SIAS are, what we do, and you'll be really well versed if you've seen this before. And if you're quite new, hopefully this just gives you a bit of an overview as to who we are. We will actually talk about the level 5 technician scientist overview. So think about funding bands, requirements, all of that kind of thing, and then the endpoint assessment methods associated with that. We'll then think about tracking the apprenticeship, how that works, what that looks like, the technical expert in the endpoint assessment. So this is the employer nominee, if you like, who's competent in the area that's going to be being assessed. Think about how we're going to prepare for endpoint assessment. And then, as I said, we've got some space for questions at the end. Okay. It won't take 2 hours. We're thinking, I don't know, maybe 35, 40 minutes, something along the lines of that. And then we'll go through any questions. So then, we are the science industry, excuse me, the Science Industry Assessment Service, and we specialise in endpoint assessment for roles within R&D, production and engineering and analytical services across the manufacturing, science and health sectors. Okay, so what do we do then? Well, we design all of the assessment tests in line with the assessment plan. Okay, and the assessment plan is available on the Institute for Apprenticeships website. Okay, we deliver those tests and make sure they are quality assured. And we will do training and standardization with all of our SIAS assurers that either visit sites for APA or facilitate remotely via software, video software. Okay, it is the responsibility of the endpoint assessment organisation to claim the overall apprenticeship certificate. Okay, so by the time you hear from us, you get an email, the provider gets an email, and the apprentice will get an email. So that's right, that's the employer, the apprentice and the provider. You will hear from us to say, oh, your apprentice has passed or been distinctive. And by that point, we will already have applied for the overall apprenticeship certificate. And that is what is sent to the apprentice at the address of the employer, unless we are told otherwise. Okay. So then, the things that we service, what the standards that we service then. We have got the science manufacturing process operative at level 2, the engineering operative at level 2, and the lean manufacturing operative at level 2. So there's a bit of a mix there between science, engineering, manufacturing. We've got the level 3 standards. So we've got the science manufacturing technician, the lab technician. This covers the old legacy and the new lab as well. Science industry maintenance technician and the maintenance and operations engineering technician, all at level 3. And then we've got the higher ones as well. So we've got technician scientists. That's what we're going to talk about today. The level 6 degree apprenticeship for the lab scientist. Now these two together, if you like, supersede the original, the legacy lab scientist. Then we've got the science industry process plant engineer for the level 6 degree apprenticeships. And we've got research scientists at level 7 as well. Okay. So level 5 technician scientist overview. What are we thinking? What does it look like? Who is this person? So these apprentices work in laboratories and are using various scientific techniques. And this, again, is taken straight from the Institute. It is a level 5 standard. So if you remember previously, the old lab scientist, if you like, the legacy one, that covered a level 5 and a level 6 mandated qualification. So you could have done your foundation degree in HND or indeed a full bachelor's as well. So the technician scientist now just focuses on the 5 pathway. It's level 5 pathway. So we've got a funding band of 20,000, and we're thinking now about a three-year average training period with the endpoint assessment taking place in the following 3 months. This time, the foundation degree, it's or an HND is the mandated qualification. So I know that there are some institutions who are running this program and they might do like a foundation degree and then they'll top up to do a full degree. That's absolutely fine. But the requirement for this standard and for gateway at endpoint assessment is a foundation degree or HND. All right, and this is what makes it very different from this legacy lab scientist that we've had. Still have to have our level 2 in English and maths, so GCSEs, functional skills. Signed off competency evaluation log, the CEL. So if you're familiar with SIAS, that is the dark blue booklet, and I'm going to come onto that a little bit further down the way in the presentation. And then we've got the project plan signed off by the technical expert. Okay, as we've said, the technical expert is the employer nominee who is competent in the area who is being assessed. Okay, so they can understand exactly what their apprentices are doing. All right. So then, endpoint assessment method for the technician scientist role. 2 methods of assessment this time. So again, a change from this 3 method. There is no case study here. So we've got the workplace problem solving project report with the presentation and the discussion. And then we've got the vocational competency discussion. Okay, so there's only the 2 methods of assessment. For both methods, the grading can be a fail, a pass, or a distinction. All right, and again, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. If you're thinking about a time commitment, again, although this isn't going to physically take a full working day, it will go over the course of about a day. All right. So then we're going to start right at the top with this. As an endpoint assessment organisation, we can't engage during the training period. Okay, so what that means then, when we are talking about the workplace problem solving project, we are not asking the apprentices to develop another problem solving project for their endpoint assessment. The likelihood is that they have done some form of workplace project. It might be a mini dissertation. They might have termed it lots of different things from the provider, but this project will take place in the final year before Gateway. Okay. It should be based in the workplace, hence the title. So therefore, we are looking for the employer to sign off on this as well and help the apprentice to sort of implement a plan for the work and that a project that has enough scope that will allow them to demonstrate, the apprentice to demonstrate their practical application of the science and therefore address the subsequent knowledge, skills and behaviours. Okay. So that's from the employer's perspective. So that's why we like a sign off from the employer on this. And I'm going to touch on what that looks like in a second. We are wanting the apprentice to be able to critically analyse appropriate literature and their own data, and then show how they have developed their investigative and work-orientated skills. Okay, what we are looking for out of this project is that it must be big enough to cover the whole project cycle. So thinking about what the problem is, identifying that problem, and then going right the way through, generating some, putting together methodologies, acting on them, thinking about the lab practice, generating some data, and then thinking about solutions or outcomes. What is the business impact of that? What is the problem? What has been the outcome? So we need to see the full project here. So as I've said, this is going to take place in the year before Gateway. The likelihood is if you're an apprentice or you have apprentices that are currently, going through this technician scientist and you've got EPA coming up, the likelihood is that you may have already submitted this project, okay? Or you might be working to submit it, let's say in the next few weeks or something like that, all right? So thinking about, as we've said, the selection of the project. It must be approved by the employer and the project plan, again, signed off by the employer, must be submitted to us at Gateway, all right? Now, it's really important to clarify what Gateway is. Gateway is only when the provider, so the university or the college, confirm the successful completion of your HND or your foundation degree, okay? So if you're with a university, the likelihood is that exam board's not going to sit about information successful completion. That means nobody can hear us, I'm going to assume.
Hi Alex, yeah, it's just
it's all right.
It's better now. It's better now.
Is it all right? Keep us right for that one because I can switch over, all right?
Yeah, thank you.
Apologies for that. I've just got a little unstable message connection there. So if you are struggling, I can switch internet connections. That's okay. Apologies. So what we're thinking about is Gateway anyway, all right? Gateway is when, as I've said, we are looking for this successful confirmation. So it might be that your apprentice has done their final exams and that's fine. And they might have a bit of a statement that says, oh, this is, these are the gradings for each exam or each project or what have you. But we do need that written confirmation. And as I said, for most institutions, that is going to come out sort of mid-August time. Okay. So that's when we're thinking about this project. The likelihood is the apprentice might be contributing to the project work of a wider team. Okay. So when we are putting this project plan together, that should just be limited to the area of responsibility of the apprentice and the tasks that the apprentice has done. So we can use a project that might have had a couple of colleagues involved in there as well, or it might be a part of a full team of people, an area of the organisation, whatever that might be. But when we are thinking about this project plan that needs to be submitted to us, it should just focus on the apprentice's contribution to that. Okay, so it is submitted only at Gateway. So if you just think about this process, it is a little bit back to front in that, well, actually, Gateway, I've just said to you, Gateway's
Hi everybody, Alex is just going to just reconnect to her internet again. So apologies about this. She'll be another 30 seconds to a minute.
Apologies for that, everyone. Technical issues, there you go. Very sorry about that. So let me share that screen again. There we go. We've got a better internet connection. I suppose this is the joys of working from home, isn't it? So we're back to thinking about this project then. So the selection of the project, submitting the project plan should come in at Gateway. Gateway is about mid-August time, so we're thinking on when the provider confirms the outcome of this foundation degree or the HND. So when the project plan comes into us, the project, the likelihood is that has already been submitted and gone, but we're just looking for the outline of it. And that's just so that we can see the scope of that plan and think, right, there's going to be enough in that to meet the APA requirements. If you're sitting there thinking, well, what happens if that doesn't happen? We work with a lot of the providers just to make sure that they have a full understanding of what that project should be as well. Okay. So then, thinking about the kinds of projects that you as an apprentice or as an employer, you might be working on. There might be a problem with, remember this is a workplace problem solving project. So a lab technique, you're thinking about maybe it's a laboratory workflow process or something else. And then you will see in the bottom there, we've got a little bit of guidance around the kinds of things that might make a suitable plan. Okay, so if we just take that first one, for example, improved efficiencies in the laboratory environment through better utilization of assets. And then we're thinking about actually what's the scope of that project going to be like? Well, let's think about improving the design and utilization of equipment or the workflow process used in the laboratories. Okay, so you can have a little look through there and see what the ones we've got. So that would just give you an overview. It might be something else, okay, but as long as it's a problem that has come up in the laboratory where there is going to be some underpinning science that the apprentice can talk about and then a business impact at the end. Okay. So then the physical report. So we've said at Gateway, we're looking for a project plan. That gives us a bit of an overview as to what we're going to be seeing. And then actually, we are looking for a problem solving project report to come into us 2 weeks before the EPA date. All right. So what we can do here is provisionally put a date in for endpoint assessment that will be confirmed at Gateway. All right, so you could come to us now if you like and say, well, actually, I'm looking for a date for endpoint assessment in September. That's great. We're expecting our results in August. So we would say, right, we can provisionally put that date in and we will confirm that with you as soon as we receive those results. All right, so let's say that all goes ahead. We've then got a September date. Let's just say, for sake of argument, it is this end of September. We would expect by mid-September that the apprentice submits their workplace problem solving report. Okay, so we've got the 2 weeks there. This just gives our SIAS Assurer a little bit of time to get their head around what the dissertation is. So if you imagine the dissertation is quite a big bit of report, the project report should be a synopsis on that. So you think about 3,000 words in total, all right? And that will have all of the text and the figures tables. References are separate, and that's absolutely fine. But imagine it, our SIAS Assurer just then gets a flavour for what the dissertation is, and that means they can familiarise themselves with potentially with what they're going to go into on the assessment day as well. Okay, so we do give a bit of guidance as to what that workplace problem solving project report should look like. So we say that we should have sections that have that include an abstract, an introduction, project aims, experimental, results and discussion, and then conclusions and references. Okay. The things we need to make sure that are covered in there. So defining the problem in the data analysis. So this is now a line into, well, actually, this is what a project report looks like with an abstract and a project scope and all that kind of thing. This is now aligning this to the grading. Okay. So thinking, well, okay, how did we define the problem? And then what data analysis have we used? Okay. So you can read through those. We are all looking for a problem solving method to be there. Okay. So either a lab technique, and it might be and/or a scientific method. Some form of analysis of data produced from the application of the techniques, and then a selection and justification criteria for those chosen techniques. The problem solution, so actually a presentation of that solution. What is it and what is the data to support that? Okay, what did the apprentice generate that says actually this is going to be a good thing to do, what's going to reduce our costs, what's going to improve our workflow? What is that? Reporting of the results. Okay, it might be actual or predicted. Because these projects might still be ongoing, okay, if they are part of a bigger, it might be that they're part of a bigger project for the organisation, and therefore some aspects actually we might have some data for, but actually we might also be working with some predicted data as well, and that is absolutely okay. Think about describing those resources involved, including the constraints and the risk. And then finally, the business impact, the results and the conclusions. So those sections there just allow the SIAS Assurer to get a flavour of what that dissertation, what the project has been around, and therefore they can start preparing for their endpoint assessment. Okay. So on the day of assessment then, so just to reiterate our timeline of events that we've got there. At Gateway, so not only are we looking for the successful completion of the foundation degree or the HND, the GCSEs in level GCSEs in Maths and English or level 2 Maths and English, we are also looking for that project plan to be submitted. 2 weeks before the assessment date, we are looking for the 3,000 word workplace problem solving project report to be submitted. And that, as I've said, that just allows our SIAS Assurer to get a flavour for that, for the dissertation and subsequently what they're going to see during the presentation. On the actual day of endpoint assessment then, these are the assessment methods that the SIAS Assurer is going to facilitate alongside the apprentice and the technical expert. So, presentation and questioning, first thing that comes up, going to take place in the morning of APA day. The purpose of this then is for the apprentice to be able to demonstrate the practical application of the science. All right, they must have some inclusion in there of them being able to critically analyse appropriate literature and their own data, as we said right at the beginning, and show how their investigative and work-orientated skills have developed over time. All right, so the apprentice has 20 to 30 minutes to go through this presentation. All right, showcase. So we've read that synoptic project. We know that now. What we're looking for is thinking, right, what is the practical application of the science? What has been your literature and how have you analysed it? What was your data? How did you analyse that? And then actually, how did we develop these investigative skills? What was the business impact? What was the outcome of that? All right, so those are the areas that we're focusing on for this presentation. So the apprentice has 20 to 30 minutes to talk through that. Subsequently, there'll be a discussion panel, okay? And that's going to take place for a further 45 to 60 minutes, and there will be a minimum of 4 questions that are asked there. And it depends really on how where the apprentice has focused their delivery during the presentation as to, we've say a minimum, but it might be actually a little bit more than that. Okay. The whole thing shouldn't last anything more than 90 minutes, okay? And it will be recorded. So the likelihood is this will be facilitated via a video call, exactly like we're doing today, except we would want to see, you know, webcams on, mics on, all of that kind of thing in order to facilitate a discussion. So that's what we'd be looking for out of that. Now, during this discussion panel, the SIAS Assurer will lead and facilitate on the questions, but the reason we have a technical expert in there, so remember this is the employer nominee who's competent in the area of assessment, they can also target a question in there as well. Okay, now the technical expert can't come in to necessarily coach or mentor your apprentices or your apprentice, but they can come in there to maybe prompt a question to the apprentice. So sometimes apprentices can be a little bit nervous going into this. So what we would say to the technical expert is make sure they're familiar with the project that's going on. But actually, if maybe, say the SIAS Assurer asks your apprentice a question and you think, well, that's quite a good example, but I can think of a better example and you're there as the technical expert, you could say at that point to the apprentice, why don't you tell the SIAS Assurer about the time when? Okay, so give them that little bit. Actually, there was a time, what about that problem in the lab? What about when you used change the equipment, the data didn't do this, your result wasn't quite right, what happened? So you can ask them a question that would just prompt them a little bit further. So the technical expert is there in a bit more of a supportive role, okay? So the themes of the questions then, and this might help the technical expert. So it's understanding of the principles of lab techniques relevant to the project. So what were the techniques that we used? How did that relate? Some analysis, interpretation and presentation of their results, equally in terms of it might be like the software that they've used to analyze. Recommendations and how they're going to benefit the business. What is the business impact? And actually the use of personal and professional skills to support the delivery of the project plan as well. Okay, so who have they worked with? Have there been internal stakeholders, external stakeholders? So what I've just said before about the technical expert, maybe he's coming in to ask a question if they see fit. They can review that synoptic report the same way our SIAS Assurer is going to do, and they might pick out some areas that might relate to these questions. And then when the SIAS Assurer does ask the questions, they might have already thought of some examples where the apprentice has done that. Now, it might be that the apprentice goes into this and the technical expert thinks, I couldn't think of anything more to say to that yet. That's great. Happy with that. And that is totally fine as well. All right. So then we've said that takes about an hour and a half. We've got the apprentice doing the presentation for 20 to 30 minutes. We've got the subsequent discussion that will take up to an hour beyond that. That will say take place in I'm going to say in the morning, loosely. Obviously, it's not a whole morning. But then we will have a bit of a break for the apprentice, but then they will go into a vocational competency discussion with the SIAS Assurer. So this is on a one-to-one basis now, okay? Now, what we're looking at is to understand the extent to which the apprentice understands the requirements of their role, defined by the apprenticeship standard and actually outside of that project. So if you think the presentation and discussion, that is solely around the project that they have been doing. The vocational competency now is thinking about their job role a little bit more holistically. So it might be that the project is spoken about again, but actually we're now thinking about in the bigger picture. So what else has the apprentice been doing? What kinds of things do they do? So this is a long one. It's between 2 hours and 2 hours 15, all right? And there is 8 competency-based questions that will be asked. One-to-one between the SIAS Assurer. So we do ask that it can be in a room free from discussions and there will be no other people present there. The apprentice can bring along a portfolio of evidence, okay? So that they can refer to during their VCD. So if they've got their CEL, a dark blue SIAS booklet, if you're familiar with us, you will know what that is. If you're not, it's coming up in a couple of slides' time. They might have identified the evidence in there, and then actually they might pull all of that evidence, and that can be, excuse me, the portfolio that they take into their discussion. I must say that it is the verbal responses of the apprentice that are marked, but they can absolutely take things in there, aid memoirs, things to show, talk about, talk around, all of that kind of thing. That is totally fine. But it's the portfolio isn't marked, all right? It is just the verbal response from the apprentice. And again, an audio recording of the whole session will be made, okay? This means that on the day, we do not release a grade, all right? That will come at a later date. We will write to confirm that. So the categories of questions then, that's going to come up on the VCD. So this is the one-to-one, SIAS Assurer, apprentice, 2 to 2 hours 15. Categories of questions. So the use of the scientific techniques, procedures and methods, reporting results, compliance with quality standards, compliance with internal and external regulations, compliance with the business rules around record keeping, traceability, confidentiality, contribution to the development of new processes and methodologies, continuous performance improvement, and impact of work on others. Okay, so those are the 8 question categories, or the 8 areas of questions, if you like, that your apprentice is going to be asked about during the VCD. Okay, so we would say apprentices can put all manner of portfolio of evidences together, and it's absolutely the way that they see fit, and they can access their evidence. That's where, you know, that's exactly how it should be. Just as a thought, it might be that the evidence can be grouped based on the 8 categories that we've got there. Okay, so thinking about the scientific techniques and thinking about results, quality standards. So you could have a section on each one, but again, this is just a little bit of advice. It might be that the apprentice has a different way of thinking about it, and they do something different. And as I've said, that is totally okay. But they can take a portfolio of evidence in at that point. It's worth pointing out that there are 8 categories of questions. But what we will do is ask, if we think, we'll ask follow-up questions. So we will confirm that the apprentice understands. So the apprentice says to us, actually, I don't quite know what you mean by that. We'll try and rephrase it. And if we think, actually, oh, the apprentice is onto something there, they haven't quite told us all, we think that's quite interesting, we might pull on that string a little bit further. So we'd ask a further question. Go, can you give us a little bit more detail about this? Okay. When the apprentice is in this VCD, what we're thinking about is how their experiences relate to the workplace. So their understanding of appropriate techniques relating to their lab. What is their work experience based around these categories of questions? So we don't want to know about it in theory. How does it work in practice in your lab? What is it that you do that hits that will satisfy these areas? Okay. So then, tracking the apprenticeship. How do we know our apprentice is progressing? Well, actually, the progress of the learner and the occupation, and this will be covered by a myriad of ways. As a provider's perspective, the degree will go, or the foundation degree and the HND will go some way to this. But actually, the employer, they're probably going to be observing and training their apprentices. They might have Q&As, they might put job reports together. Okay. They might write a trusty essay at this level, and that is absolutely good too. Okay. Obviously, we've got the qualifications in there. So there's the HND and the foundation degree. And as you're going through, you might go, well, actually, I've done my first semester and this is what we've got. Or, you know, this is what I've achieved, or I've submitted 3 assessments or something along the lines of that. I've done, you know, first 6 months of my HND, and I've done this, and this. So you'll be able to, you know, we can track like that. At this level, it might be that actually we've got some additional quals in there, or some training, GMP training, IOS training. It might be like equipment specific training that you've got going on, and but it totally depends again on the job role. We would say going through this, however, the apprentice should be developing a portfolio of evidence. And as we've just alluded to from the VCD, that's where this portfolio of evidence is going to come into play. Now, it might be that actually they start developing a portfolio from day one, and they've got lots and lots and lots of it. It might be that actually as they come close to the time of EPA, that becomes a bit more streamlined. But it's just about getting the apprentices, or getting the apprentice into the habit of keeping a portfolio of evidence. Think of it a little bit like a CPD log almost. Okay, so if they have that, and then they can streamline it as we're going through. What we would always say, however, is that any development, training, teaching and learning should be tracked against the standard, because on the day of endpoint assessment, that is what we are assessing against. Okay, has the apprentice met knowledge, skills and behaviours as outlined by the apprenticeship standard on the day of assessment? A lot of people will say, well, they've achieved the degree, so, or the foundation degree, and that is very true, but that is only one part of the apprenticeship. Okay, that is just one aspect of it. The other aspect is actually going through successful EPA as well. Okay, so on enrolment with SIAS, you will receive, if you are the provider, it's likelihood it goes to the provider, could go to the employer, but you will get 2 booklets. Okay, you're seeing them on the screen now. You've got a dark blue booklet, the SIAS competency evaluation log. Now, this is what we look at. This is the sign off from the employer to say, yes, my apprentice is ready for endpoint assessment. The training period has been completed. Their degree is completed. We've received notification of the successful completion of that. And then we've got the SIAS competency tracker. The competency tracker can be used by any of the parties, by the apprentice, by the provider, or by the employer. And this just allows the apprentice to sort of track as they go, or any party, any of the 3 parties to track as they go against the knowledge, skills and behaviours in the standard. Okay, so we'll look at the cell first then. This is a screen grab taken from the cell. Now, this is just so you can get a bit of a flavour for what it is the employer is signing off against. Okay, so we've got housekeeping and logistics at the top. That's what I like to call it anyway. Apprentice details, company name, addresses, all of that kind of thing. We've then got the SIAS technical expert validation. Now, as we've talked about, the technical expert is the person who is competent from the organisation in the area that the apprentice is being assessed. Okay, so, and again, I've got some slides about that at the end that we will talk about. But it must be that technical expert that signs off to say, yes, my apprentice is good to go. They are ready for EPA. We've then got an employer declaration at the bottom there. Now, it can be that the technical expert signs throughout this, and that is absolutely fine. Or sometimes there might be a training manager or HR manager or another colleague that has done a little bit of signing off in this, and therefore they can sign into that employer declaration. I must make clear that it is the employer and people from the employer that will sign off against this to say the apprentice is ready. This is also taken from the cell as well, all right? And this is the physical, if you like, or the sign off against each standard statement, okay? So the statements are taken from the Institute of Apprenticeships, the assessment plans that are there. So for example, if we look here, we've got S1, and it says the principles of non-complex laboratory techniques and scientific experimentation and how to contribute to the development of technical projects and implement new processes according to the literature. So that is taken straight from that standard, okay? What we're looking for here is an evidence record. Well, where is the signpost to the evidence that says your apprentice can do that? And it might be that you've got training records for that. It might be that your apprentice has got a Moodle or a Blackboard or some form of like online e-learning platform that they can use. They might have a trusty paper file and they've just called it their apprenticeship file, okay? But all we're looking for in there is a signpost. So not necessarily that it's, well, in me training records of the company documents, it's page 36 and I've highlighted it in green. Doesn't need to be that specific, it is just a signpost. We ask that the technical expert, someone from the employer, checks that evidence and then signs off to say, yeah, that evidence is there, exactly where the apprentice has said it is, and actually it does match up to statement number 1 there, okay? Check and sign off. What we would say with this is that this will allow the evidence record column, this will allow the generation of the portfolio of evidence that can go into the VCD, okay? Now, this is the final sign off at the end, okay? What we have and can be used as a work in progress document. SIAS do not require sight of this at the end. So as I've said, very much a work in progress, can be used by any of the 3 parties. What we have is this is taken from the tracker. Okay, now the tracker is the light blue booklet. And what you will see there is we've got standard statement 1 and 2 together. And then actually we've got a little number 1 there, all right, that we've not got any S assigned to. Well, that's because it's not a standard statement, but what we've put in there is a little bit of further detail to say, well, actually, what are they going to do and how would they ever show that? Well, actually, to cover standard statements 1 and 2, they will have, the apprentices will have their HNDs or their foundation degrees, okay? And it might be that all of their work is on their Moodle or their Blackboard, so therefore we can put it in there. So if you think about this as a work in progress document, what this means you can do is scrolling it, writing it, cross things out, put better bits of evidence in. But ultimately, at the end, this can be lifted, and it might be the apprentice that fills this in, but this can be lifted and then transferred into the cell. And as long as that technical expert just checks that everything is there, everything is valid, that's how this document should work. Okay. So then, thinking about the technical expert now in the EPA, we've given the technical expert a bit of airtime during this, and I haven't really told you too much about it just yet. But the role of the technical expert then. So as I've said, this is an employer-nominated person who is competent in the area that the apprentice has been assessed in. Okay, so they have done the job that the apprentice is doing or have some experience of that. The technical expert is responsible for the gateway review before the assessment day. Okay, so they're going to review and sign off the competency evaluation log. What they're saying is that the training period is done. The apprentice has been trained, they are now ready for endpoint assessment. Excuse me, and they are going to sign off on the project completion confirmation as well. Okay, so as we've said, the apprentice will put that together. It can only be put together at gateway, remember. Gateway is when we've got the successful completion from the provider. Apprentice puts that in there and the employer is going to sign off against that, and that should be submitted at gateway. We then work with the technical expert to support the assessment day as well. And this is the presentation discussion EPA panel. So the workplace problem solving project presentation discussion, that's where we want this technical expert to sit. Okay. So We've said the technical expert's going to confirm that the project's been approved by the employer. They're going to sign it off and they're going to submit it. All right. We then said that the apprentice needs to submit their 3,000 word report to us 2 weeks before their endpoint assessment date. Okay. Now, we would say at that point, can the technical expert read and review it, okay, prior to the presentation panel? All right. So that's what we want them to do. Our SIAS Assessor is going to do something very similar. It allows them to become familiar with the project that the apprentice has been working on. It might be, as a technical expert, actually, you weren't necessarily involved with the project, but you had a meeting every week with the apprentice and you're really au fait with everything that's happened there. But we would also say, always say rather, please make sure you are familiar with this project. Otherwise, you mightn't be able to support the apprentice in the capacity that is required for this, okay? So it might be that the SIAS Assessor looks to you to provide a little bit of clarity about the context of the project, any of the science, technology that has been referenced in there, okay? So we would always say, please make sure you are familiar with the project. And it's not to say that you need it to be a part of it. You don't. You just need to have that familiarity, okay? So then, provider and the employer. On registration then, we issue you the cell and the competency evaluation tracker. We've also got a full pack of documentation there as well, an EPA preparing pack. Now, these timelines are for illustrative purposes only, because obviously it then will depend on the duration. But I've said here about 6 to sort of 9 months before the end date, that's when we will run a technical expert induction, okay? Sometimes they can come in a little bit sooner than that, sometimes they come in a little bit later than that. But that's when we can commence the EPA scheduling process. And as I've said right at the top, there is no reason why you can't put a provisional date in the diary. So you might come into me now, as I've said, so we might have had an induction just last week, say. And me said, well, Alexa, I'm looking for September. And September's going to be the best time for us, because by the time it gets to October, we're into audit. Actually, I've got annual leave, apprentice has got annual leave, and it's just going to be, it's not feasible for us to do that. So that's when we can say, well, actually, right, let's say September, the end of September, and we can say provisionally, this is the date. And what we'll do is confirm that on receipt of the grades from the outcome from the university. Okay. We will then confirm the EPA date. So once we have that, now this has to be within a 3-month period, remember, because that is the whole time frame for endpoint assessment. So within that time, we will confirm that. So as soon as we get that grading, we can confirm the date. We then are going to request the gateway evidence. So again, we have that. We are looking for the apprentices' achievement at level 1 English and maths. We are looking for them to complete their competency evaluation or have a signed off cell competency evaluation log. We need that project plan submitted at gateway. And then remember, we need the report to come into us, the 3,000 word report. That comes in 2 weeks before the assessment date. Okay. Now that's going to depend on your timeline as well. So actually you might have, it might be quite a tight turnaround, and it might be that everything is submitted in gateway, including the 3,000 word report, because if we've triggered gateway from, let's say, confirmation of the results mid-August, you might say, well, actually by 1st of September, I want my apprentice to be assessed. If that's the case, we need to have that 3,000 word report in a little bit sooner than, oh, well, at gateway rather. Okay. We will go through that approvals evidence for the gateway. And again, this is just making sure our SIAS Assessor gets this 3,000 word report so that they can be familiar with what it is that they're going to see for the apprentice's endpoint assessment. All right. So I've talked about the role of the technical expert then. How do we work with the technical expert? What are we going to do? Who should that be? I've said it should be someone that is coming from the employer who is competent in the area that is being assessed. We do take them through an application form and induction process, all right? It's not quite as intense as of a job application, if you imagine, but we do ask that they complete an application form. So it is their name, workplace address, qualifications, and any recent CPD that they're doing, and who they are planning on acting as a technical expert for. We'll then make sure that they are competent in the occupation that is being assessed. So that's why we look for their CPD. We want them to be able to hold a qualification at the same level or higher than the standard. Now, this can be replaced by a letter from the employer. However, at this level, the likelihood is this person needs to have the same kind of qualification or a higher level qualification in order to sit as the technical expert role. And we do ask that they have experience of current work and practices within the organisation. Once we have identified that person, that's when they come in for induction. Okay, so they'll go through a technical expert induction. What we then go through is the signing off of the cell. putting the project plan together, the report, so a little bit like what we've covered today, and then actually what that person's role is, the technical expert's role on the day of endpoint assessment. So there's a couple of areas in there that that the induction focuses on. And what we say is once that induction has taken place, we're going to send you an induction record. If you can, sign and return that to us. We will issue you the technical expert number, and that's what's recorded in the cell. And those are the pages that I showed you a little bit earlier on. Okay, so if you're going to refer back to this, if it will be the first page or the first slide rather after the dark blue and the light blue front cover documents. Okay, so in there, it'll just tell you what you need to do. So it's SIAS technical expert validation, name, sign, and put that number in. So that's how it all comes together. Okay, now that there is just about the end of our webinar. All right, so has anyone got any questions? Is there anything in there that anyone wishes to discuss? They want some further clarity on?